So yeah, when dealing with a model, you can, by the way, pose things here. I haven't really done a pose. I've basically just deleted the history in the mesh and then moved it aside. You can do that, or you can pose it and then delete history on the selected mesh, and that will give you, generally speaking, a good usable pose. Or you can pose inside of ZBrush. That's not a problem. And you can try GoZ. GoZ gets a little bit sensitive when you have groupings. It may actually reject GoZ. So worst case scenario, if you get this pop up, I usually just say create to create a linkage and send it over. And if it's still an issue, I'll just select all the mesh, export it as an OBJ, and then import. Yeah, in this case, it looks like it's coming in okay. Yeah, when you have lots of little parts too, this will happen. You'll see it kind of like go up and down and try to verify every single part that's coming in. Again, if there's some weird issues with color and things like that, usually I just go to flat color. This is my custom interface, but you can also just go to color. Make sure you're on a brush that has color, which is either standard or a paintbrush. So yeah, I would go to color, color, make sure we're set to whites, and then just go to fill object. If it's yellow here, this is a material problem. So again, you can go to material. I usually go to flat color. Again, if you have to turn on material or mRGB, I'll do it here. I think in the default interface, let me just go back to default, restore standard. It's up at the top here. So mRGB, then you go to, oops, where's my model here again? Yeah, mRGB, go to color, fill object, and you'll see it kind of reset. It should, in theory, reset this. Unless I'm on the wrong tool, yeah, which I am. So I'll select that tool with the arrow, color, fill object, and then it sort of resets things to a kind of default. So now if we switch between materials, it should kind of update properly across all tools. Okay. I'll just go back to my custom interface. So restore custom, there we go. So as I mentioned, there's a few issues. One of the first things that you'll notice is if I have a draw size, because this thing came in at the Maya scale of 75 units tall, ZBrush is a bit limited for draw size or brush size. So you have one of two ways to fix this. You can either take all subtools and scale them. So if I hit W, E, or R, and I'll just reset my pivot to roughly center. If you turn on this little icon on the far right side, it's like a check mark with a line. This will now scale all subtools at once. Right, so we can actually scale this down. And you can see now I'm at 7 centimeters. ZBrush's preferred scale is something like 2 centimeters, right? So you can get down to about that size. And then I'll turn off this option just so I don't forget it later on. So now you see my draw size is much better relative to the model. Another option, if it's still a bit limited, is to go into Preferences, Draw, and increase your max draw size. And then we also have this thing called Dynamic Brush Size. So again, it's like a multiplier on the brush size, and you can set that higher as well. I don't usually go too crazy, but now you can see I can get an absolutely massive brush size. So this is, for me, is going to work fine. As mentioned, at 6-7 inches tall, or about 165 millimeters, a lot of these small details would take a long time for me to kind of fix and edit. So for me, I basically wind up deciding against keeping a full print and going with the bust. So I'm going to delete basically the subtools I don't need. So in this case, I do want to keep, I think, part of this collar. So you can decide to maybe use something like the trim brush. I'll just say skip note for until restart, and I'll just slice, let's say, through here. Okay. I might just slice off the sides as well, because I don't really need the sides at this point. And I could also kind of fold and bend this thing around this sort of bow tie thing. But again, I'd want it to sort of wrap around the model. So again, I might just try to split this. If this thing is just overlapping mesh within the subtool, I'll go to, again, my kind of custom interface, mesh editing, subtool organization, and go to auto groups. Auto groups, again, in the standard interface is just on the right side under polygroups, auto groups. So I'm going to Control-Shift-Click and just delete that bottom part, delete hidden. And now if I center my pivot, I'm going to reset it holding Alt. So Alt, click on the upside down teardrop. That will, oops, let me just redo that. You got to be a little bit careful too, because Alt clicking on different areas will also switch subtools. So just be aware of that. So Alt click on the upside down teardrop. I'll just try and do it from another view there. and then reset the pivot. If you click on the gear icon, you do have a really kind of nice option to do what's called a bend curve. And so, again, it's got a bit of a weird interface, but you have kind of like curve points. It's the outer orange triangle. And if you lift it up, you'll get lots of points. If you go down, you have fewer points. I usually opt for fewer typically. And if you have to change the axis, you typically go to the red cone and you can change it from vertical, horizontal, or based on depth. In this case, the default right now is working. So if, again, you wanted this to wrap around the surface, I recommend just using the bend curve so that it sits very, very flush with that collar, okay? So that's kind of one trick I use a lot, and sometimes I'll thicken the backside. There we go. So if you're happy with the shape, oops, that's a bit down, there we go. Click on the gear and you can hit accept. If you don't like it, you can go to reset or delete, but once you hit accept or delete, you'll go back to the regular move tool, okay? The other thing you might notice, like I said, if this prints at this quality, it's going to look this chunky. So I usually will divide the mesh, the individual subtools. So I'm hitting Control D until it is like fairly smooth. I'll do the same thing over here. Control D, oops, sorry, Control D, Control D. Sorry, keep hitting Control S by accident. Control D, there. Now I'm getting a bit of chunkiness here. So, oops. Why is that happening? Yeah, there is some awkwardness with the wireframe. So you can decide if you wanted to. I might just go back to low res for a second here. I'll just go back to division level 1. Because of my slicing, my trim tool, I've got different polygroups. So I could just say, okay, let's maybe Z-remesh this thing quickly. I'll say keep groups. In this case, I'll probably just turn on symmetry for the model. And I'll say maybe we'll keep it the same and remesh. Okay, so that should give me much cleaner polygroups for divisions, so I shouldn't have any kind of weird errors, right? The other thing is I typically will want to avoid very thin pieces like this too, so I might just try and, so I'll undo the remesh and just maybe slice one more time just to clean this up. There. Okay, so again, I'll remesh, keep it about the same. That's pretty good, and then I'll hit Control D. Now, if I still feel like there's a bit of an issue, I might try to slice, but I'll save that for later on when I'm going to trim this up to make it perfectly flat. If we have models that are not perfectly flat at the bottom, sometimes we get issues where the print doesn't stick to the print bed because only part of the bottom is touching, and then you have this like tiny gap. So again, gaps and voids can be a bit of a problem when it comes to modeling, and again, you see I have a problem here with that as well, right? Between the bow and the rest of the model. Okay, so I'm having a little bit of weirdness as well with the model. So, okay. I think partly the issue I'm having is my position is off. My XYZ position is off. So I'll show you one way to fix this fairly quickly, which is to go to Z plugin, transpose master, and you click on transpose mesh. So what it does is it'll temporarily combine all subtools, and then I can quickly reposition and center the whole model. Now so it's center of the world. And I think the scale is a bit off too, so again, I'll set it to maybe 5 on XYZ. Where is it? Yeah, for some reason it's shooting off in space. I'm not quite sure why that's happening, but okay, there we go. Okay, so that is good. Yeah, maybe I'll go to 15. There we go. I'm noticing whenever I try to frame this, it's sort of shooting off in space. What might be happening is there could be a stray piece of geometry somewhere else in the scene. So I bet if I, use select rectangle and just isolate this by holding Control Alt and clicking and dragging. I'll go to delete hidden. And now if I hit F, yes, this frames properly. So there might have been a piece of geometry sitting way off in space that was sort of screwing up my pivots as well. Not just the scale or the positioning, but actually the pivot there, I think there. That's a lot better. And again, I'll just double check that the whole scale is fine. Okay, so I'll go back to Z plugin. And we're going back to subtool. So basically you go back to transpose master, T-pose mesh to subtool. And in this case, it's giving me an error. In this case, I don't care so much. I think it's because I deleted some other mesh. So if you ever delete or have errors in certain subtools, the transpose mesh thing may screw up. In this case, I'm okay with that because I am going to just basically treat this or work with this as if it's one mesh. Okay, so what I do want to do is I'm probably going to smooth this mesh overall. So I'm going to hit Control D to divide the mesh up a fair bit so everything looks fairly smooth. There are going to be some issues though. One thing I'll point you to is the glasses, right? And this you'll see the glasses are kind of distorting. And if I go to a much more contrasting material, you'll sort of see that problem, right? There's this kind of rippling inside the lens, and that's because of these triangles. So in this case, there's a few problems. The glasses are very small and very thin. They may not print well, so I'm going to probably scale them up and exaggerate their size just to make sure that they're printable. I'm probably also going to separate it as a part because, again, there's a lot of these little undercuts and cavities that are going to have lots of supports which may not print well. And I can sort of see that if I kind of cut this thing flat on one side or make it nice and flat on one side, I can print it flat and then attach it later on. So I'm going to isolate these glasses and go to, I'm just doing that with Control Shift clicking, and then I'm going to go to Split Hidden. Okay, let's do that, Split Hidden. Okay, and then there we go. So there's the model here, and then I've got the glasses here. So again, one of my easy fixes for this is to probably do a group by normals. Because there's a lot of hard angles, if I do group by normals, I know that I'm going to get this like very nice, clean, quick recreation of all the sharp angles. And that way when I go to something like Z Remesher, I can say, okay, keep groups. Maybe we'll keep it the same poly count, and then I'll hit Remesh. And it looks pretty good. If you want it to not sort of change the overall shape, which it looks like it did a fair bit, I usually recommend turning off smooth groups, and that should keep the volume relatively consistent. Another trick to this is to actually, yeah, I'll keep it the same. That's fine. Okay. So I'm going to just solo this for a second. So what I'm going to do is basically, delete. I'm going to just check the mesh out. Yeah, there's some overlapping parts, right? So there's kind of like the ring section here, and then an inner cylinder, and then the wireframe, which is fine. I'm going to keep them independent. I know I'm probably going to scale these glasses up, and so I think one issue is that if I just do a straight up scale, it's going to look a little awkward, right? So if I do this, oops, you know, it's not going to sit well. It doesn't match with the eyes, so I want to kind of thicken things. One of the easiest ways to do this is to actually just go into deformation and hit inflate, right? So inflate might give me a nice kind of chunkier looking lens. Maybe not that much. I'll dial it down a little bit here. So just over exaggerate a touch. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's working okay. Okay, and then I think what I'm also going to do is, again, I'm going to plan to actually move this off and print it on its sort of side like this, so I can basically attach it later on, and I'll show you some tricks to this too. So I'm going to divide this thing up a few times. Now the shape is a lot rounder, so there's some ways if you wanted to fix this because of the inflate issue. Sometimes I'll just go into Z Modeler, and by default it's on Insert Edge Loop. If you hold Alt, you can actually remove some of these excess edges that are creating this kind of bulging effect. So I'm going to just do that quickly here. And I think that's pretty good. Now if you divide this too, it's going to round out quite a bit. So another trick to keeping the edges sharp is to basically go to Crease. It'll automatically crease any edge that has a major angle change. So when I hit Control D now, you see it keeps it nice and crisp. You're also probably noticing the other side isn't the same. I didn't do it in symmetry, which I probably should have done, but I'm going to wind up mirroring this anyways at some point, so I'm not too concerned about that. So yeah, basically I want to create a perfectly flat side. So I'm going to, I've divided the mesh up to give it a nicer, kind of smoother appearance. I'm going to actually just delete my low res divisions, and I'm going to go to a side view. So I'm left clicking, dragging, holding shift. I want to make sure perspective is off, because if you do this to a side view, you see there's not a clean angle, but if you turn off perspective, you get a nice, sharp, non-distorted angle. And I'm going to use the trim brush. So again, this will allow me to kind of cut right through the mesh and give me a nice kind of flat-sided model. Sometimes, by the way, I'll mention this. If you take a look at this, there is a problem with this creating a weird piece of filler mesh over here. So sometimes as an alternative, you can use clip curve. What clip curve will do is not kind of create a hole, which then creates a flatness, which then creates another problem. What it does is it just flattens the mesh against itself, okay? So it's the same mesh, but there will be another problem here in that we have this kind of like overlapping polygroup, okay? So what I recommend doing at this point, this would be a whole bunch of errors, okay? And if I try to, let's say, smooth it out, it could create some other mess. So what I'm going to do is basically just Dynamesh this thing, and that should be fine. So I'm going to Dynamesh this. Usually I'll turn on what's called project. So what it's going to do is take this version of the mesh and project it into the new Dynamesh version, which will clean up all these overlapping polys. And then you can also have it do a polish as well. This is good for things like this that are kind of machine made. So I'll go to project, polish, and then Dynamesh. Oh, big mess. So sometimes I'll try without the polish. Let's just try project and see. Yeah, it's still a bit of a problem there, but oh, I think also my scale, I am noticing the scale is still kind of off on everything. So I'm going to just turn on all the subtools and just scale this up a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's going to help. Dynamesh is actually very dependent on object scale. So if things are way too small or way too big, it gets very messy. So I'll turn off the subtool thing now, and I'll try to Dynamesh again. There. So you see that's actually turning out much, much better with Dynamesh, right? So again, I'll try Dynamesh with project and polish and maybe up the resolution a bit just so I can keep or maintain as much of the detail as possible. Oops. I think I didn't center my pivot here when I scaled it. So let's do that again one more time. Sorry, I'll rescale. So I'm looking at this XYZ slider. If, again, you don't have my custom interface, it's under geometry and then under size. You'll see that slider there. So yeah, I'd like to get to about 1-2 centimeters in ZBrush terms. There. And then if I Dynamesh, this should work out a lot better there. So again, I'm going to up the resolution just so I keep the smoothness that I had in the model. Yeah, that's a little bit better. There. That's pretty good overall. Okay. And then, yes, I think I may have undid one too many steps. So I'm going to just clip curve, and then I can always re-Dynamesh, right? So Dynamesh again, and it cleans it up very nicely. So Dynamesh is a very, very useful tool, I find, for creating these solid single shell non-deformed mesh. And again, I didn't do my mirror and weld yet, so I'm going to do that right now, mirror and weld, and you see I get the exact same shape now on both sides, right? So mirror and weld helps. Again, that's under geometry, modified topology, I believe, modified topology, mirror and weld, okay? Okay, so I'm going to go through these other tools. Yeah, one problem is if we have a mouth opening like this, even though it's very subtle, it will create a cavity, which then has a bunch of supports that go inside, and it's really hard to clean them out without breaking something. So a lot of times I recommend, if you can, let me just solo for a second. If you can, it would be ideal to close the mouth. So one of the two tricks is to just simply use move topological. I'll do this in symmetry, right? So you can kind of like nudge things back and forth or use a smaller brush size, right? And then close the lips. By the way, I do recommend dividing this mesh up because when it divides, it does smooth it. And so you'll probably have an even bigger gap in the mouth. If there's things like teeth in there, you could probably delete them. But again, if you're going to Dynamesh, it will go away on its own. Because anything that's overlapping, that's inside the volume, the overall volume just gets erased. If you do want to exaggerate, by the way, divisions might not be wise early on, so I'll actually turn them off. But if you hit D on your keyboard, this is like dynamic subdivision, so it's a smoothing preview. So it looks smooth. And again, I'll maybe up this dynamic division here, so it's nice and smooth at level 3 or 4. And that way now I can actually still go in. So I may want to keep, let's say, the hard edges of this eyeball, for example. So I'll go to Z Modeler, hover over the edge, and if I hold a space and go to crease, edge loop complete, right? When I click on that now, right? So this allows me to edit things very, very quickly without having to like go up and down a division or delete higher divisions. So this speeds things up. So as mentioned, a lot of these hairs that create cavities, I'm either going to scale them up or inflate them. So you can try that. Sometimes I'll just grab these and just literally hit inflate. It's not always the best solution, but it can be good in a pinch where things are really sort of sticking far off. but mostly I use move topological. And again, I'm going to look and sort of see. So move topological is very smart. Where the red dot lies is where it's going to grab the mesh. Here, I'll go to skin shade 4 so it's easier to see. So then I can grab this and put it flush against the face. Okay, so we don't have this really pulling off and creating these like micro cavities that can be difficult to print and create a ton of mess. Right, because then you get messy supports, messy cleanup. So again, we want to try to avoid any tiny gaps and overhangs. So this hair here, again, just bring it up against the head. So that's one of my tricks. It's either inflating to one side or grabbing it with a move brush and just making sure that it sort of rests in a good way. And I know there's a few of these, so these hairs all along the side. Right, we just pull them in. So it's anything that tends to be kind of horizontal. So like these whiskers, I'm also going to probably strategically separate. They're also very thin, so I'm probably going to over-exaggerate them and scale them up a bit. Okay. These hairs are okay. Yes, they're going horizontal, but they have such a broad spike that I think they will be okay in the supports arena. And again, if there's ever any opening between, let's say, the neck and the collar, I would want to get rid of that. So this stuff here, for sure, I'm going to just either pull the backside, right? Just pull it down so it's not going to have that gap or that cavity, right? That helps quite a bit. And check from the top side, because again, we want to avoid voids if possible. Okay. You know, if you look at toys too, a lot of toys, especially like your kind of McDonald's toys and stuff, they're what's called injection molded. So basically, there's usually a model, and then right, there's literally like plastic that's fired into a mold, like a steel mold or aluminum mold, and then sometimes in the injection molding process, they're hollow. But if you notice, a lot of times they'll simplify the shape so that there's no gaps, right? Like the arms are right against the body, or like I said, if there's coattails, right, or certain features, instead of it kind of dangling off, it'll just become part of a single solid silhouette. Make sense? So again, we could have these things be kind of separate and floating, but then you'd want to be breaking things down into smaller parts. And because I'm going to be printing, up to 40 or so models for you all, I don't have the time to kind of do all that extreme processing. So if you want to break things down into some extra pieces, that's totally fine. But just keep in mind that I recommend you try to keep things more flush, right, to the body, so that we have minimal cavities and open areas. So you will have to make some compromises. And generally speaking, too, it's a good habit to have, if especially if you wind up progressing in 3D printing in any way. Because you'll want things to be mass producible, easy to produce, be less labor intensive, right? So some of these little spikes, maybe I'll keep them. Oops. And again, the big thing here, there's a big cavity right between hat and hair. So I'm going to go, again, with move topological. I think in this case, you could also just control-click on the hat because it's a different polygroup. I'll hold Alt to reset the pivot and just drop the hat down, right? So it really makes solid contact with everything. And if anything else is poking through, again, I'll use move topological and just kind of drop, part of the head. The ears clipping through doesn't look good, so I'll just kind of, grab the ears and kind of have them flow a bit better, right? I do recommend if you want, you can make a pose, a posture, if you want to make an expression. I do use the move brush a fair bit, but one thing I've been using more lately is actually snake hook, because I'll just show you one thing. Snake hook, when you grab it and pull it, you see it kind of creates like a curvature, whereas the move brush is very linear. It's just like, right, pulling from one point to another. So if you're grabbing something like snake hook, it's actually really good for expression. So if you grab this, right, we can kind of create more of an arcing smile shape. And then maybe I'll grab the brows here. Yeah, let's try that. I'll just try to make sure the eyes are not affected. And if you want to, again, the simple way to do this, if it's all in one subtool, you can basically, if let's say everything was a single polygroup, you would just go to auto groups. And in this case, I can just control click on the base here, which will mask everything else. And then I can start to kind of work my shape a bit. And again, I want to watch any cavities, especially around the eyes and things too. So if things are a bit deep there, I might just kind of tweak and adjust a little bit. Very devious. Okay, so last thing I think I'm going to do is adjust the whiskers or split them off. And I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to let's just clear the mask. Like I said, these whiskers seem to be part of this polygroup. So if you want to, again, usually I just go to auto groups, which again in the default is under polygroups, auto groups. So then I could Control Shift click on this whisker and this one and then hit split hidden. Again, because I know these are really thin and they may not print well, I'm going to exaggerate them again with inflate. Okay, so I'll overinflate them. And then I'm going to pull them in. Oops, let me just make sure I'm on the right subtool here. Turn off all subtools if that's on. So what I'm going to do is kind of position them in and maybe move them up a bit and maybe rotate them a bit. So I'm going to show you a little trick that I've started using recently for this sort of thing, which is to actually, I'm going to print the whiskers basically separately. So I am going to keep them as a separate subtool. And I'm also going to print the glasses separately. So let's go to the glasses. So I want the glasses to actually sit a lot more in the face. So I'm going to drag them down. There we go. Yeah, maybe something like this if I can. And I'll take this mesh. By the way, like I said, I have dynamic subdivision on, so I'm going to just apply this, which applies the divisions directly to the mesh. And I'll do the same if I have it on here. I don't have it on the glasses because they're dynameshed. And then where are my whiskers? Let's go to the whiskers, turn the visibility on, and I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'll go and basically hit apply. So what I actually want to do ultimately is to take this, and I'm going to essentially Boolean the glasses. So what I have is I'll essentially have a place for the glasses to sit where I can kind of glue them together. I'll print these parts separately and I'll glue them together. The only reason I'm doing it is because I feel like I have to, because the size of these particular objects are so small. The only other alternative I find is to either, like, we're not going to scale our prints up bigger, but you can do that. And one other alternative to that is to simply omit those parts, but I feel like it's a sort of important part of the character, so I want to keep these two elements. Now, Booleans in Zbrush are a bit weird, so if I basically, I'll show you what happens. I'll turn on the downward icon for the layer or the subtool of the hat, basically. Then if I go down to the whiskers and turn on, basically it's a dark circle with a clear circle overlapping it. And you want to turn on live Boolean. Again, I think in the default interface it's a button across the top. But you see now how that's cutting holes into the mesh, right? So what that is going to be useful for is that I can now print the glasses. I'll print them together, but the glasses will be laying flat on the plate, and so will the whiskers. And that allows me basically to just essentially glue it together later on. Okay. Now I may adjust the positioning of the glasses. I think it's a bit too close to these whiskers, so I might just move them up the nose and face a bit. Okay, and then I'll turn off the visibility. So again, I want to make sure I don't have kind of like this undercut that's happening. So I'm going to just shift this upwards a little bit. And that should be enough, okay, for me to get a clean shape. And the same thing with the whiskers. I'm creating a bit of a deep void or cavity here. So I may just tweak these just a little bit so that they sit outwards a little bit more. I don't need a deep hole, but enough of something to grab onto. And I may also, yeah, let me just hold Alt and move the pivot point further. So I might just kind of slant it a bit more so that it's less recessed, but I also still have like a notch or a guide where I can put these in, okay? One last thing I should do actually before doing this, so let me get it a solo. I'm going to actually undo this rotation. I do want to create a flat side to this, so I'm probably going to do a trim on these whiskers just to, because again, I know I want them to lay flat on the print surface. If it gives you an error because there's division levels, just delete lower, and then I'm going to just do a quick trim. There we go. Right, and then we'll get it a solo. There. So again, if you wanted to, you can hold Alt, maybe reposition a bit, and angle these back just so we have less of a deep void and something of a groove that allows these to kind of slot in nicely. Okay. So, like I said, if you hit Boolean, make Boolean, which I believe is in the subtool palette, is that right? Yes, Boolean, make Boolean. It'll create a whole different subtool. So Zbrush has kind of updated a little bit with a nice feature. So if you grab the base head and hit Control F, it's going to create a folder. So I'll just call this Boolean for now. Okay, and then I'm going to drag in these other two models so that they're part of this folder. So what's great about this is that instead of it shooting off when I hit make Boolean, you can actually click on the gear icon for the folder and it'll say Boolean folder and keep it as part of your project in here. Okay. And so what's going to happen is now I have the Boolean shape. Okay. And I want to make sure there's no cavities or anything hiding out. I think everything looks pretty good. Now, I do want to keep the other parts. So I'm going to turn back on the visibility of the other folder. The only thing is I just want to hide off, I'll turn off any Boolean options, and I'm just going to hide the visibility of the original base head here. And then I've got now this folder. And I find too, we can sometimes get errors from Booleans, right? Zbrush handles it way better than any other 3D software, especially Maya these days, but sometimes you can still have lots of errors. In this case, the mesh looks fine. So I tend to go to optimize points, but sometimes as an extra step, what I will do is go to Dynamesh, and I'll show you again. I typically use the project option and the polish option. And if you hit Dynamesh, just make sure that the quality of the model looks as good or better than the original. So sometimes if, yeah, polish right now is actually kind of over sharpening the shape a bit. So I'm going to undo that and turn off polish. And the resolution also wasn't high enough. So I want to usually meet or exceed the current poly count. So I'll try and up the resolution slider and hit Dynamesh again. And I think this will give me a pretty good result. So yeah, this looks pretty good overall. And even with Dynamesh, you know, sometimes we'll see, you know, little jagged edges, and that should be okay. Sometimes we're getting, you know, little projection errors, but like I said, I usually do this if there's a big problem. But in this case, I found the Boolean version of the model is actually pretty clean. So whether you're starting from this Boolean mesh or a Dynamesh of all your parts, models over 1 million polys can be very heavy for the 3D printing software. So what I recommend we do is something called Decimation Master. Before getting to that though, one last thing I should mention is I do want to have a pedestal. So typically what I'll do is append a cylinder. So I'll grab a cylinder here, and then what I'm going to do is just try to center it. I'm going to scale it pretty thin. We don't need anything super fancy, so you can leave it as just a very, very simple disc. And I recommend that the scale of this thing be just wide enough that it'll support the base. Again, I don't need it to be, you know, kind of crazy thick. Usually a fairly thin disc is enough just to give it some support. And I want it to overlap and intersect the bottom of the mesh. And again, if I can avoid little cavities here, then that's what I'm going to try to do. Also, try to avoid anything, again, that looks blocky. Like this has a blockiness to it. So the simple way to deal with this is to go to Geometry, Crease, and just hit Crease. So Geometry, Crease, and then just hit the Crease button. Okay, and then you can hit Control-D and divide a couple of times. And that should give you a nice smooth pedestal. And then if you need to tweak, you know, the shapes here, let's say, I'll just, again, go to Move Topological and just maybe drag down, you know, parts of that that bow tie or whatever. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, yeah, I do want to merge these two. So I could do another Boolean, but typically what I do, it's fairly easy, is I'll just go to Merge Down. Okay. And by the way, you don't always need to turn on projects, because projection might have caused some weird little gaps here. So I'm going to just try turning off project, but turning up the division, the resolution on Dynamesh. So this will merge basically the base of the head with the pedestal. In fact, I could have also just added that that cylinder to my Boolean group as well, my Boolean folder. So either way would work fine. Okay, and I usually, as a finishing move, I usually like to go to Check Mesh. There's an error, Fix Mesh, and then I'll hit Optimize Points. By the way, these, again, in the default interface, it's under Modified Topology. Where is it? I think, yeah, Optimize Points is here, and then for the fixing of the mesh, it's usually under Mesh Integrity, Check Mesh, Fix Mesh. So again, I try to kind of group these things in areas that make sense. And yeah, this time with the project turned off, I don't have any issues with the it's sort of jumping across little cavities. And even if it looks a little bit kind of gritty, just remember that this thing is going to print at a size that's going to be kind of like this. So you won't even see some of that roughness in there, okay? Now again, I mentioned this before. The issue with this is that the poly count is quite high for the slicing software. So a step to optimize this is to simply go to Z plugin, and I'm going to use something called Decimation Master. So what Decimation Master does, I'm going to hit Pre-Process Current, which is the current subtool. It's going to basically analyze and look at the surface. So anywhere that has a lot of detail, it's going to strip it out. It's going to turn everything to triangles. I know you've heard me preach for now a year and a half, 2 years, like triangles are bad, but there's this is the exception to the rule. It's also a bit of a cheat too. You can actually, anything that's non-deforming, so non-animating, non-flexing, non-bending, like your character rigs, like rocks, terrain, cliffs, things like that, things that don't move can actually be stripped down to triangles. That's totally fine and totally acceptable. And you'll actually see it more and more in especially video games, but even it's making its way more into film and TV production. And so what's great about this is that you can now have a hyper-optimized mesh that keeps as much detail as possible while stripping out as much polys as possible. So that's basically what the software is doing. It's a two-step process. You have to analyze the surface, and then when you're ready, you go to Z plugin. You can set a percentage slider, so I want to go to like 5% or how many polys or how many points. So you could say, oh, I want to get to like, I don't know, 50,000. This is in thousands of polys, and you hit that, hit enter, and then hit decimate. And you see how it strips it down. It actually preserves most of the detail. I used to do this thing where I would undo, and I realized that's a mistake because you can actually just change the number here and hit decimate again, and it just quickly pops in. So this is now 500,000 polys, and if you take a look, it's actually not that different from the original, right? I mean, it looks practically the same. So it's a huge, huge advantage, right, to decimating, right? If you didn't have the wireframe on, you would almost detect no difference. So for me, when it comes to 3D printing, I now just go to the default of 250,000 points, which is roughly 500,000 polys. That preset works great. So that's great for this this particular subtool. And I'm going to just process the other two, the whiskers and the glasses here. I think the whiskers are okay at like 100,000. It's not a big deal. Just remember that I've rotated these, and I do want them to print flat. So I'm actually going to just undo to where they're flat, and I'm going to rotate them just for my ease of use later on. I'm going to hold shift and rotate 90 degrees, and I'll do the same thing with these glasses here. So I'm going to make sure I'm on the glasses subtool, pull them over again, shift, rotate. I don't have to have them in perfect position right now. They're fine the way they are. Let's just make sure they're visible. They'll get auto arranged in a minute. So the glasses are 48,000 polys. So again, everything's like under 1 million polys total, and this is fine. So one of the last steps is to actually check the scale and size of the object. So I do recommend maybe, we go to Z plugin. So this is a final step before getting into Orca Slicer, is to go to 3D Print Hub. And again, I mentioned that we're kind of aiming for about 165 millimeters in height. So usually what I'll say is I'll go to update ratio, size ratio, and you want to pick something that's roughly close in millimeters. So 1.6 millimeters is way too small. 40 by 2 by 13 is close-ish. So click on that, and it's going to update the ratio here. Yeah, so I'm going to pick whichever axis is tallest. It's kind of odd, actually. Anyways, yeah, I'm going to go to Z plugin and just set the maximum. I think it's on X. Usually it's Y, which is the vertical, and this thing is quite high. So, I might actually be on the glasses. So you want to make sure you're on your biggest subtool, by the way, which will be this one here. So let me just go back to update ratio. There we go. So I'm on the bulk of the tool, and I'll just set the height in this case because the hat makes it super tall. I'll set it to 165. One last thing I did recommend to the person whose project this is to maybe squash the hat down, make it a bit shorter, or in this case I could also just do a quick edit where I just go to let's say trim curve, and then I'll just kind of give it a little flare, and that should be okay, right? So that could work if I wanted to sort of give this thing a bigger print scale. Okay, so yeah, let's go back to Z plugin, and yeah, this should be okay. You can also go back to update ratio and then back and set this to 165. So what I'll do is I will just merge visible in this case. So usually I'll save this as my Z tool for the kind of editing process, just so you can always go back to it and edit. So I'll go back into my folder where the project is, and there we go. Just call it print prep. The reason I'm going to do merge visible, this will kind of collapse all the visible subtools into one tool, and it just makes it easier for export. So I'll go to, yes, in subtool, merge visible, and then we'll have that under here. Where is it? It should be called merge. There we go, merged. Right, so the tools are just kind of sitting there. Yeah, and I think these are, if these are not separate polygroups, you may want to reorganize that quickly just with the select lasso or select rectangle and hold Control Shift Alt, and then we can just hit Control W. It shouldn't matter too much. It's easy enough to split and reorganize inside of the slicer, but I find this helps a bit. So back to Z plugin, ratios should be pretty good. And I'll go to Export STL. This is what's known as a stereolithography file. So there we go. I'll just put that in here, and I'll call it, give it a name too, like your last name or whatever the project's called. Okay, so I'll say, let's check this out now inside of the slicer. I'm going to delete this file, go to File, Import. There we go, print file, open. Oh, it does say, you know, sometimes you do get an error where there's other edges. And again, I should have maybe double checked in here. Yeah, there were 10 edges that were a problem. Fix, optimize. So sometimes if there is an error like that, I'll just go back in ZBrush and fix it. But if it's only a small number of errors like that, it's easy enough to fix inside the slicer itself. But I'll just try to update it here. Sometimes when I'm doing lots of edits, I'll do that. And I can actually go to, if you right click on the object, you can actually tell to reload from disk. And if I reload, I actually have more errors. I don't know what it is. Sometimes with print files, I still get errors from ZBrush. So usually I'll wind up having to do a repair anyways in the slicer. Okay, so it took about a minute or two, and it got fixed. I'm going to rotate this again 90 degrees. There we go. Again, I'll hit S for scale just to make sure my height is about accurate. So whatever the biggest axis is, sometimes the models are very wide, so I'll tend to go with the widest dimension, if it's the left to right or the front to back. Usually it's height, so 165 is good for me. And again, what I'll tend to do, like I said, I plan to print these flat on the print bed and not just floating in space. So one way to organize this is to right click this and say split to objects. Now, this is something I'm going to wind up doing. You won't have to deal with, but once the objects are split, you see that they just go flat to the bed. So that's why I oriented things in this particular fashion. Okay. And again, best thing to do is to basically hit slice plate to test it out. For me, you can just submit the STL from ZBrush. You don't have to do all the prep inside the software, but if you want to test it for like lack of detail or things that might be missing that you may want to exaggerate, great. If I see an issue with it or it prints badly, if I see an issue, I'm going to just send it back to you and say, you fix it. And I'll tell you why or how very briefly. And if it prints and it's a bit goofy, then I'll basically say, this is the print you get until I get a chance to reprint. Okay, so I'm going to hit slice. Again, I usually go to the finest resolution to see how it's going to print. Again, I should have set this to tree support, but I'll see what it's like with this. So about 7 hours, 7.5, 8 hours with all these parts. Again, if I switch to tree, it might actually be faster. Sometimes it's slower. It all just depends on how much overhang there is and how steep the angles are. But yeah, this usually works pretty good. in this example, it's actually like 3 hours longer. So funny sometimes. Can't always tell how it's gonna turn out, but yeah. So sometimes I'll go with either, you know, the thing that I feel like is going to give me the best supports. The supports can also create some little scarring or some issues with the contact points. So sometimes I'll switch between tree and normal, just depending on, you know, how I feel like it's going to be most efficient. The other thing I'll do as well typically is that I'll actually try to fit 4 prints on one plate. So, you know, it'll probably take me anywhere, you know, if this is a 10-hour print, it's a good chance it's going to take like 30 to 40 something hours to print 4 models at once. Okay, so that can sometimes also be an issue in terms of time and all that, but oops. Okay, so I'm just repositioning with the move tool. And also, if I feel like the print time's long and I'm not necessarily benefiting from quality, sometimes I'll just try to switch to a 0.15, and I'll just transfer any, these are basically support details. I'll just transfer them to the new profile that I have, which is the speed with a slightly bigger, 50% larger layer. But because the character is like very simple and stylized, yeah, I mean, now the print time's gone down to 7 hours, right? So sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act. The only thing that'll happen or that might be affected is things like this. You see there's a lot of banding here because there's very kind of shallow angle changes, shallow horizontal changes. And that can cause this banding just because of the very nature of the way things are sliced and produced. And so that's something else that I will consider. And ways around this, if you see big banding or if it looks bad enough in the print, sometimes I'll just touch it up with some paint or a bit of sanding, and that cleans up the mesh. Luckily, I'm going to be printing in this kind of like white material, and the paint I have for it matches very well, so it can kind of plug up these little bands or gaps. So again, if I switch back to 0.1, go back to transfer and slice again, it should give me a much cleaner looking area. Again, it'll still probably be a bit of a problem, but much less apparent and visible. Okay. And if you take a look at the prints that I have on the desk up at the front here, you'll see where some of those issues are, okay? And they're not super hard to fix or adjust. So yeah, I think I'd probably go with the 0.1 layer height in this case, just because it does give this a little bit of a better result. Yeah, one last thing you should double check is the bottom here. So sometimes, like I said, if things are not perfectly flat, which is one of the reasons why I created just a simple cylinder and I use the trim curve or clip curve to create a nice flat shape, is that sometimes when there's a curvature and it's off the build plate, you'll have a void with something curling up, kind of like the sphere, right? So it can create some other problems and create some scarring or some print errors. So that's why I try to create nice, flat, solid areas so that you get a good adhesion. Because the other thing is the plastic, while it's hot, it has to stick to the build plate. The build plate, which is this kind of gray thing you're seeing, it's literally, this is like a recreation of the actual build plate on the printer. It also heats up during print time. So once the print's done, it'll cool, and then it should pop right off the plate. But if your print doesn't stick to the plate, then you get, kind of spaghetti messes. So like, I'll show you 3D prints not sticking to bed, right? So you'll have things where it peels off and then the whole thing just becomes a bunch of errors. And in a worst case scenario, when it's a big print, if I don't catch it, it'll be a big spaghetti mess. Okay, so that's another kind of no-no. So ensuring you have a nice flat, bed or a nice flat model on the bottom prevents this kind of disaster from happening, because it can also damage the printer, right? The plastic goes everywhere and it can start to clog around the nozzle. So yeah, it's important to make sure your model has a nice kind of flat, clean bottom so it'll stick pretty solidly to the plate.